There are two ways to move through life. One, as a victim of the situations you are in, and the other as someone who builds a meaningful life based off of the things that they have and the materials in front of them. One waits for their situation to change. The other one says, what can I build from this based on their life events? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Victimhood feels safe. It protects your ego. It explains stagnation in your life. It removes responsibility, but it also removes your power. Because the moment you believe that your life is controlled entirely by external factors, you surrender the exact vessel that moves your life forward, and that's agency. Without agency, momentum dies. Now, before we begin, I do want to define something very clearly, and that's that being a victim of an event does not mean that you're living in a victim identity. Pain happens, loss happens, things that are unfair happen, but that doesn't mean that you are identifying with that topic. Because ultimately, identity is purely interpretation. The TLDR and the general topic of learned helplessness is that individuals having experienced loss after loss or failure after failure in a repeated environment tend to learn that the events control who they are, even to the point when they have visible opportunities for change, they still hold to the idea that the event is the actual acting component on the outcome of the situation. Now, what this leads to is they stop trying, not because change is impossible, but because they've internalized what their reality is. That they ultimately feel as though they themselves are powerless against the events that happen to them. Not because change is impossible, but because they internalize powerlessness. And that fundamental belief becomes self-imposing, and it becomes self-imposing to the degree that their emotional state is routed in victimhood and powerlessness. It's a cognitive pattern, it's a lens, and it becomes a lens-shaped reality. Now, two people can experience the same event. One will say, that ruined my life. The other one would say, that redirected my life, even though they, at a fundamental level, experienced the exact same event. Different interpretation, different direction. To give added context to this topic, psychiatrist Viktor wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that a man can lose everything in his life, but one thing prevails, and that is the attitude one has in any circumstance. Now, when we dig a little further into what that quote ultimately represents, there's a reason that he chose one's attitude, and that's ultimately because while yes, an event can happen, what actually determines the outcome is going to be their attitude and their attention to detail in specific aspects of what they have as options moving forward. If you are stuck in a victim mentality, you're not going to see your power in your redirection of events, but you're going to see the events as what is going to redirect your outcome. And when we look at this through anyone's life, you can see where someone sees opposition as redirection, then you're going to see that person hesitate when it comes to actions, not because they don't think that they can't act, but because they feel they have to wait to act. But if you change the dynamic and you say obstacles or training, you learn to adapt to your environments. One, not only do you act quicker, but two, you actually start to reprogram your brain to not see things coming into your life as power forces, but start to see you moving through life and being able to dodge and weave what comes at you. Because if there's one thing that you can determine in life other than death, it's that bad things are going to happen at some point. People die, money changes, realities change, markets change, people come and go. But the one thing that stays is the attitude that you bring, the mentality you have shifting through the things coming at you. And to wrap that into a tight bow, when we're looking at the topic as a whole, we see that momentum does require movement, but the idea and the belief of victimhood ultimately freezes you, not only disabling your ability to move forward in the direction you're supposed to go, but two, stagnating any possibility of a positive event happening, subsidized by the idea that some magical gift's going to fall out of the sky, and it just doesn't. Now, here's the part that no one's going to say out loud, and something that is just a hard pill to swallow, and the truth is that victimhood feels good at times. Not only does it avoid accountability, it earns you sympathy, it lowers people's expectations, and ultimately, hey, if something bad happened to you and it really wasn't your fault, well, then you don't have to explain for it. And ultimately, you don't have to fix it. Because hey, if the entire system's rigged, it's not your fault. And if everyone is responsible for the issues that are in your life, then you don't have any accountability and you have to press no effort into it. And the thing you have to take from that And the Achilles heel, when we look at that topic, is that freedom from accountability is freedom from influence. If you have no action in the topic, then you have no directive control of where you're going to go. And that would be fine if it's not your issue, but the thing is, what we're talking about is your life, and no one's coming to fix it. You got to fix it for yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have people in supportive roles. That means you can't rely on a God, but it does mean that between your counsel, God, things happening in your life, and all the things coming in, good and bad, you have to find a middle ground to be able to direct it. But the truth of the matter is that freedom from accountability is also freedom from influence. If you can't influence the outcome of your situations because you're stuck in the victim mentality, well, then ultimately what we're looking at is someone who is not only waiting for obstacles to change, but also sitting with their hands on their lap, saying, well, we'll see what happens. That doesn't change anything in life. And ultimately, removing your accountability also strengthens anything possibly happening. Because even if I were to give you $1 million, or I were to fix your health issues, or I were to change the past, ultimately, we're just waiting until the next event happens. If I gave you $1 million, you just sat on it with your hands on your lap. Well, the truth of the matter is that it's going to go faster than it came because you don't know how to handle it. And the topic isn't even necessarily about your financial literacy, but it's about the idea that if you're not accountable to the small things, well, then you're not going to be able to handle the larger things. Excuses are easier than discipline. Stories are easier than strategy, but an easy explanation turns into a hard life. Now, when we look at this as a topic, as a principle, when we look at the momentum principle, momentum itself is fragile. It requires initiative, it requires ownership, it requires repetition, and it requires responsibility. And that's a hard thing to stomach when you're stuck in a mindset of victimhood. Now, we all can get into these at times. Here's how you consistently rewire your brain to seek outside of victimhood and to actually grab a hold of your situation and take accountability for what you could have changed. And hey, looking forward, what can we change? Because the second you say, well, there's nothing I can do, you stop moving. Here's how you keep moving. Let's dig into it. Now, you don't fix it with toxic positivity. You don't fix it with denial, or you don't fix it with trying to deny that pain happened. You fix it with structure. Now, first thing you're going to want to do is write it down. And you're going to write down 1, what happened, and 2, what story you're going to tell, because they're not the same thing. When we look at what happened, we're seeing a neutral database, a pure graph of this is the events as they took place. The story you're going to tell is the actual meaning. It's the narrative that you're twisting on the topic. I crashed my car, now I don't have a car. That would be the neutral database. Hey, I made a bad mistake. I could have avoided a couple things. Some things can be quoted as out of my control, but ultimately I'm looking forward to driving less recklessly and learning in the future. Those are 2 different stories about the same database that happened. Psychologist Ellis argued in one of their literatures that it's not the events that disturb us, it is our belief of the events. I've just put over there that the beliefs of the events are above the events, because the truth of the matter is that how we see things actually dictates our reality. I talked about this in my first video in regards to attitude, the attitude we take, similar to victimhood as a state of attitude. When we look at what is it that happened versus what are our beliefs of what happened, we can overcome a bad situation with the understanding that we are going to improve, or that we're going to take things in the future, take accountability for how can we shift that in the direction that we want it to go. Now, the hardest topic I get with this, because I have talked to people about this in the past, and they say, well, this event really was out of my control. But the truth of the matter is, in any event, there are micro actions that do dictate the control to a certain extent. It can be as simple as the effort you put into it, the passion you had towards the thing, your preparation of the situation, your fitness, your learning, or even your consistency in whatever it was that you failed at. When you act even small, it prepares you for helplessness. The biggest thing that we can really take from this topic is the idea that there is a mental game that you need to play with yourself, where you need to replace any sort of blame that comes into your life. And that can be from multiple sources. We can see that from people. We can see that from topics. We can see that from religion. And you need to convert that into strategy. Because when we look at the topic of replacing the subconscious and initially the conscious with the idea of looking at an initial lens of blame to strategy, we can't just replace victimhood, especially if it's been something that's been programmed in us from our parents as we saw raising up, or the figures we had in our life that we looked forward. in as far as our inspiration, we need to replace the action. So how do we replace the action? First thing you can do is listen to what you say. A very common one here that you would see is someone who says, I have to versus I get to. Or someone who says, they made me versus I chose. Because the language that you use reinforces whatever your beliefs are. Because every time you speak without agency, you are reaffirming the pathway that you are in a victim mentality. And you shift the language before you even have the choice to make an action. Because the brain is ultimately very adaptive to the different seasons in your life, meaning that yes, at any time you can change for the better, but at any time you can also directly shift to the worse if you're not attentive on your language or you're not attentive on the way that you're seeing your outcome on the world. Because the truth of the matter is, if we see our life as a book, and I'm not the best drawer, so bear with me, here's my life. You as the person in the story, well, you're not the author, but you are the editor. So while yes, there is things that happen, and we've all had a sad story to tell, I could sit up here and tell mine, the truth of the matter is that you have the topic and you have the ability to go in and edit things. Now, that isn't to live in a life of deceit, but it is to live in a life of optimism. To live in a life where you seek the ideas of what can be. You look forward to the things that you're working towards, and you don't sit on your hands, as we talked before, and just kind of sulk in the way the world is, or say, well, this happened to me, that happened to me. So choose carefully, because the story that you tell is a story that you live. And regardless of what happens in your life, good or bad, or whether you end up where you initially wanted to be, you could go a hell of a lot farther if you just care about what you're telling yourself and you just care about the direction and where you want to go. And instead of putting your power on other people, you should put it in your own hands. Take your responsibility, your accountability, and your victimhood into control. Live a life that God made you to live. I'll see you guys next week.